Let's get started. Welcome everyone to this RE&D seminar today, where our dear colleague, Professor Kuntala Lahiri-Dutt will be talking about just transition for coal in India. And you know, when we kind of watch the Australian policy discourse around climate change and emissions reductions and the role of the coal industry, you might think this is a massive political and social problem in Australia, the prospect of job losses and therefore, you know, potential economic downturn in regional areas, central Queensland, Hunter Valley, as a result of that. And you know, we can see real political effects of that. Consider what it is like in a country that produces a lot more coal and where that coal is produced in a much more labor-intensive way, and where there's a truly large number of livelihoods that actually directly depend on that, right? And India is a country like that, South Africa is a country like that, and we can think of a few more. And so this is a really massive issue. It's a massive issue for development. It's an issue socially, and it's ultimately also an issue for climate change policy, because if we don't get that transition, or if individual countries don't get that transition sorted in a somehow acceptable way, then that will stand in the way of lower emissions outcomes. And so Kuntala has worked on these kinds of issues for many years. There's a very extensive and impressive publication portfolio that sits behind that work. And so the only thing that's left for me still to do is to acknowledge country. And so we're all on First Nations land. In my case, and probably in the case of the majority of us, we're in Ngunnawal land here in Canberra, and we of course acknowledge the elders past, present, and emerging. And so it's over to you, Kuntala. I think you're going to talk for about 35 minutes, and then we'll have a good discussion after that. Thank you for coming, and over to you.
Thank you, Frank. Good afternoon, friends. I'll just share my screen, and I'll be talking using this PowerPoint. I thank you for making time to be here today to listen to this webinar. I hope that all of you are going well and that you are safe in the midst of this unsettling pandemic. First, I acknowledge the Ngunnawal and Ngambri people whose lands I speak from. I pay my respects to them and recognize that their land was never ceded. Now, coming to the topic of my seminar today, the title of my presentation roughly conveys the unfinished nature of my journey of studying coal in India. This journey started in mid and late 1990s when I began researching the decay of peasantry and the rapid expansion of coal extraction in eastern India. At that time, I used to take a train from my university town to the colliery area. The train was named Black Diamond Express, and that name might convey to you how coal has been seen in post-colonial India. Even today, coal remains at the heart of India's urban industrial development project. Therefore, it's only rational that we should talk about justice at this critical juncture in India's history to ensure that the poor do not get left behind as the country considers moving away from coal. Today is a particularly interesting, important day because India's 135 thermal power plants are running short of coal today. They have only about 2 days of supply of coal. As you know, the price of coal has increased rapidly in the global market, and India has, the supply chain has been disrupted by the pandemic, and India is now in the midst of the possibility that we will go back to the 1970s scenario of load shedding, which means power cuts. This is the cover of the Economist magazine and cover story of 5th December 2020 issue. It asks us to look at Asia, and they say in a big way that Asia needs new policies to kick its coal habit, and soon. It is true that coal consumption has rapidly grown in Asia. 77% of global coal use is now in Asia. Coal is at the toxic heart of the fossil fuel economy, still 27% of raw energy of everything globally. Asia is unique because the major coal mining countries have state-controlled mining companies, power stations, and banks. This is very different from the global north countries. But the question is, as we talk about decarbonization, will coal transition look the same in global south countries? To understand what justice would mean in a country like India, we need first to understand coal's role in India. In its recent report on India, the International Energy Agency notes that it was coal-fired electricity that allowed India to achieve two critical successes. First, what they call the monumental success of bringing electricity connections to millions of poor people around the country. And second, grasp the transformative potential of renewables, particularly solar energy. Yet, coal's days are not over in India, not yet. India remains the third largest producer and consumer of coal and the second largest coal market in the world. India is the third largest emitter of CO2 in the world, even not considering the bunker emissions from biomass burning and so on. So although on a per capita basis, its emission rate is only half of the global average. Putting aside India's population size and the expanding economy, if only I focus on the need that every rural or poor household feels for one electric bulb per house to educate the children, I will not be entirely wrong if I say that much of India's future prosperity hinges upon coal. It is for valid reasons that India has attributed an iconic status to coal, as I had illustrated in my book, The Coal Nation, that was published in 2014. However, India is also at a, as I said, crucial juncture of history when it can choose from a wide array of energy futures. Let us not forget the 270 million people who will leave the rural areas to come to the cities over the next 2 decades to live in the bustling urban centers, the shift away from the biomass that will inevitably happen, the growing middle classes who will demand air conditioning or other devices, the humongous construction projects that will be undertaken to house them in these mega cities or provide them with increased mobility, and the surge in demand for steel and cement that will drive the construction industry. Is it possible to offer an alternative for coal to this dynamic economy par excellence? In my next slide, I lay out the arguments about India's coal transition. So here you are seeing that, look at the title of the slide. It reminds me of the famous Zollverein colliery of North Rhine-Westphalia, which has now turned into a museum exhibition for visitors to experience what coal-based lives looked like in the past. I was invited to help the organizers to give a global flavor to this exhibition. It is a reminder that overall, coal is on the decline globally and must too, to save humanity from the effects of climate change. About India, my two arguments are laid down in this slide, and I will let you read it. Timothy Mitchell showed that coal's advent gave rise to unforeseen kinds of mass politics in Europe and America in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. In new workplaces, labor unions, political clubs, people, people forged a political consciousness with which they fought for more egalitarian and democratic collective lives. So coal was the material that not only built new socio-technical worlds, but created new forms of political agency. Extending that argument, we can say that energy transition is making it possible to imagine new forms of energy democracy. Now, the term democracy has different kinds of meanings, but the most widely known is that it can be about ways of making effective claims for a more just and egalitarian common world. Democratic struggles are fought over the distribution of issues in the public or private domains. For example, the level of wages paid by employers. Capitalist owners would say that wages should be a matter of private concern. But democratic view would say that it's a public concern rather than private. This logic of distribution designated a new field of government, as you know, which is we know today as the economy, whose rules set limits to alternative political claims. In recent years, scholars have noted that what we usually consider as the economy, the monetized part, is only the tip of the iceberg. A very large part of the economy exists beyond or under this tip. Formerly, political economists called it the informal economy, but lately, Keith Hart, for example, has used the term human economy, and the British scholar Ash Amin used the word social economy because this segment presents a great diversity in forms of economic transactions, excuse me, labor and enterprise, unpaid work, care work, and non-capitalist enterprises. The reason why Gibson Graham calls it diverse economies. Coming back to coal, its decline can be attributed to different reasons, depending on the context. Cheaper alternatives in the US, such as Shell. UK was North Sea gas, solar and wind, but sometimes government politics as well, as we have seen in the case of EU. But broadly, there has been a rapid increase in coal production since 2000, driven largely by China's economic growth. This resource-intensive growth triggered a commodity boom from 2003, in which the price of commodities reached a record high. Investments in coal mining all over the world increased, turning Indonesia and Australia as the two main coal exporters in the global market. So still, coal, the idea of reliance on coal, what is it? Let's have a look. With our Crawford ex-PhD student, now Dr. Donny Pasaribu, who's a very efficient economist, I had a look at coal reliance, and we developed a coal reliance index, or CRI. We looked at three things: coal production, so supply, demand, and external factors, and they were weighted, and we came out with the list that you are seeing on the right-hand side of this this slide. So you would see that, very interestingly, India is not that coal reliant. On the other hand, Australia is a lot more coal reliant than India. It's actually the first topmost coal reliant country. So let us now go back to India and look at what exactly is coal reliance in case of India. So the data that you are seeing in this slide is sourced from the Ministry of Power and are greatly confusing. What you are seeing here is the fuel mix. So electricity is a little different. I do not know all these why it's different, but I know that the data are conflicting. Why do I say that? Because International Energy Agency, in its 2021 report, notes that 70% of electricity in India comes from coal. And the new electricity policy that India adopted has also noted that India needs more coal in the coming decades. So, however, experts such as Rahul Tongia, who was the lead author of the book Future of Coal in India, says that although solar now contributes to less than 4% of electricity and coal nearly 70%, by 2040, they will converge in the low 30%, as India fully goes through the solar-powered revolution. So thermal power generation that you are looking at is increasingly less government controlled. Another data from the Ministry of Power shows that installed power capacity in India in 2021 was that central government was producing 26%, state governments were producing 27%. So altogether 53% of electricity production is in the state sector, and the private companies produce 47%. So this is a major change from about 25 years ago, when only the state used to produce coal. But suffice it to say that India's current energy needs are largely made by three fuels: coal, oil, and biomass, making it up to 80%. And this has remained the same since 1990. In fact, coal has strengthened its role as the dominant energy source. It holds the key to power generation at the moment, and it is the fuel of choice for many heavy industries, such as iron and steel plants. Now, let us then go a little bit into the details of how the coal supply chain. See, just transition discussion globally is characterized by debates on winners and losers. That is, who will gain from the new energy systems, where and how. We know that wind and solar do not come up in the same locations where coal was being extracted. So we are not going into that question of spatial justice here at all. But taking India as a typical country of global south, what we need to know is the entirety of the picture of how coal is extracted, by whom, how it is moved, etc., to make sure that no one is left behind as coal mines are shut. So in this slide, I will draw your attention to some of the recent findings on coal reliance to look beyond the 44% figure given by the Power Ministry. So how is coal moved? From the pit head, coal is moved by trucks to a nearby coal depot, from where it is transported again by trucks to the nearby railway station. Although more than 65% of India's cargo is moved by trucks, the trucking industry is entirely in the informal sector. Truck driving is the profession of choice for most poor, illiterate, first-generation migrants from rural areas. An estimate puts the size of the economy at nearly 11,000 million US dollars in 2020. So there are around 2,000 trucks per million people in India. That means around 2 million registered trucks on Indian roads. My conservative estimate would be that at least 1/4 of them would carry coal. Each truck has at least 2 helpers besides the main driver. These 3 individuals have families, and if there are about 4 members in these families, that gives us a ballpark figure of 1.5 million people relying on coal trucking, leaving aside the owners of the trucks. So this calculation, of course, does not consider relative advantages of transporting coal, say, over other raw materials, trip numbers, and each truck makes, and the incomes from distance covered, and so on. So the trucks then bring the coal to the railway stations for being moved by wagons that look like this. Indian Railways, the state-owned company, transport coal from extraction sites to power plants, and the existence of this largest employer in India. It employs 400,000 people. Largest employer in India is rely largely on moving coal. According to a study by Brookings Institution, coal provides 45% of the incomes of Indian Railways, which subsidized its passenger traffic by overcharging the transport of coal, oil, etc. So Charles Waddingham, there is a Sydney-based organization, IEEFA, argues that a more important problem is over-congestion of railways, where the passenger trains run at full capacity both ways, whereas freight trains return empty. So he says, I'm quoting him, consider transporting coal by rail to distant power plants as solid electricity being inefficiently moved along an inflexible one-way path. Without massive investments in infrastructure building, it will be impossible to meet the ambitious target of producing 1 billion tonnes of coal by Coal India Limited alone by 2025. So moreover, India's coal geography has been changing, and the ultra mega power production policy of 2005 allowed coastal power plants, and so large power plants of at least 4,000 megawatts using high efficiency supercritical technology were set up. Of all the 9 projects that were originally proposed, 5 of them came up in the coastal locations. So obviously coastal locations, why are they being chosen? So that they can use imported coal, and also the possibility of using seawater for cooling, thus solving the problem of scarcity of fresh water. So without going into these details, one can broadly say that along the railway supply chain are hundreds and thousands of people whose livelihoods are coal dependent. Sandeep Pai, a co-author of the book Total Transition, estimated a micro-level coal reliance using district-level indicators. And he says that there are currently 600,000 pensioners in the formal coal mining sector. With more coal mine closure, this number will increase to 1 million very quickly. He also calculated the CSR, corporate social responsibility spending by coal companies in the districts where they are operating, and the effects of the dwindling CSR incomes would also be significant, he says. And then there are direct and indirect impacts on all of these people. So Pai's indicators included more than 15,000 jobs in coal, more than 10,000 pensioners, more than 70 million rupees, Indian rupees in CSR spending. And he came to the broad conclusion that 42 districts in India are coal dependent in a broad way, of which 33 districts whose economy will crash totally if coal mining is stopped. Now, there is also the question of land. When we think about net zero India, like in other places, land is highly contested in India. So is its correct nature and definition. For example, in cases of Charankha solar park in Gujarat and in Assam, farmers actually opposed a solar installation. Additionally, there are community-based organizations who advocate for environmental conservation and point out that supposed wastelands may actually be fragile and home to unique ecosystems. Again, Charles Waddingham, researcher with IEEFA, cites the work that was done by the Council of Energy, Environment and Water, the Energy and Resources Institute, TERI, and Shell, and the International Energy Agency. And he concludes that for India, there would be 3 things needed. First is minimizing the total land use requirements for renewable energy. Second is optimizing the identification and assessment of land for renewable generation. And the third one is increasing the stock of potentially suitable land for renewable generation. And now let us look at my work on coal mining in India. So I say that coal mining does not come from CIL, is Coal India Limited. It's a state-owned enterprise that produces 600 million tons of coal produced last year. Imported coal, I call it exigent coal, because that is a response, the government's response to exigency, that is 200 million tons. But then there are private captive collieries that are producing what we call neoliberal coal, because that was neoliberalization of the command and control economy from 1992 onwards. They are producing about 80%. They were captive until recently. They were captive to the thermal power production, no longer though. And in the recent last 10 years, some state PSUs have also appeared on the scene as exigent. They see the coal market, they invest in, for example, Rajasthan, that doesn't have much coal, invests in coal mining in central India. But then there are these two interesting cases, informal, illegal, or subsistence coal, as I call it. There are lots of people who were displaced by the coal mines are also into coal mining now, which is informal, illegal. But then there is one state in Northeast India where the traditional owners of the land own the resources of there. They have a special status in Indian Constitution. But according to the Minerals Act, coal cannot be mined by anybody but big companies. So here is a strange situation of non-legality. People are mining, and I call it statecraft coal, because Nehru gave that state a special status, the tribals in that state, a special status in Indian Constitution to bring it within India. And they say that it's our moral right, sovereign right. So if you look at the labor involved in all these economies, I mean, now we can add informal, illegal is 500,000. Coal India Limited, CIL, is gradually declining. But Coal India Limited gives out most of its work. 50 to 60% of its work is given out to contractors, who are the local leaders, political leaders, business leaders, and so on, what we call SMEs. And then these people hire people who were displaced, or the women that you saw, shoveling coal into the trucks. So these are the contractors' labor. That's again informal labor. Daily wage labor, very poorly recorded, almost unrecorded. Similarly, I would say that the captive mines also run on the same principle, would have contractors. State PSUs, they have no experience, but they get the work done entirely by contractors. So there's this huge informal sector that is, I wouldn't even say that it's, I say it's piggybacking. It's really lying underneath. It's like, it's the tip of the iceberg is what you're seeing, Coal India Limited's production and the private companies' production and the imports that are happening. But there's a whole lot of stuff happening underneath within that iceberg, sunken part of the iceberg. So I do not know much about justice. I'm just a political economy person who deal with resources. So I went to the top person, Professor Michael Sandel of Yale University, who wrote the book, Justice, What is the Right Thing to Do? So we know that just transition is about winners and losers, but let us put some human faces on these categories. We know that there are 4 types of justice, procedural justice, distributive justice, retributive justice, and restorative justice. But for us, the important, things that we need to be the 2 kinds of justice that we need to be aware of are procedural and distributive. So at the heart of these kinds of justices lies redistribution of power. And the 5 key principles that we need in redistributing power are access to resources, equity, diversity, participation, and human rights. See, I'm not a philosopher or legal expert, right? So I'm just thinking about Michael Sandel's work when he says that justice is not only about the right way to distribute things, it is also about the right way to value things. So 4 of the 5 principles teach us to value both the formal and informal economic, social, and cultural arrangements and realities. So, and they also encourage us to ask, what kind of justice, whose transition, and from where to where? So in this diagram, I put up from, where do we want to go? There are 4 approaches to just transition, as you know. Status quo, I'm not going to explain all of them. Managerial reform, structural reform, and transformative approach. So what we are looking for, is transformative approach. See, if we use this, market technology and financial flow, that circle, that is not just transition. According to Ashley Dawson, it's just green capitalism. So Smunk et al. Showed that energy transition can be described as transition towards electricity. And electricity has come to be associated with large-scale centralized systems, gas, thermal coal, hydro, nuclear. Decentralized RE is just the opposite. It's owned by people, SMEs, and local communities. It requires more space than coal and gas, but still, Clack et al. In 2020 has shown that decentralization makes more economic sense. So Marie-Claire Bribois of Sussex University suggests that the creation of energy cities, for example, alternatives, I'm talking about these energy cities are on the forefront of issues such as energy poverty, local economic development and action, have the capacity and resource to realize projects. They are strong political actors. And it is not impossible to be done. The windmills owned by communities in Denmark, the 50% co-op, of all RE in Germany, 50% is owned by cooperatives. The wind turbines that are owned by First Nations people of Western Ontario, the Just Transition Alliance in Oregon, and the Labor Network for Sustainability in the USA, these are democratic, inclusive, and community-led initiatives. Decentralized, community-based RE is working also as an alternative model in Cambodia. How do I know that? Because my son's friend, a engineering graduate from ANU specializing in solar energy, left his good career here and set up his NGO in Cambodia to work with the poor. And so let us have a look at just transition debate in India. This debate has just recently started and is still very top down. iForest is an agency, think tank, that split from Center for Science and Environment, which was at the leading edge of climate change thinking, Anil Agarwal and Sunita Narayan's center, but iForest is now led by Bhushan, Chandra Bhushan, whose perspective is given in this slide. So basically, they're setting up a Just Transition Center and having a meeting actually tomorrow night my time. They are recommending that we need defining time frame. We need to establish an inclusive transition planning. They are not really going into the details, the nitty-gritties of the kind that we researchers do. TERI is a large consulting research firm, and look at their perspective. They have also carried out a study, but again, I think they are beginning to realize the intensity and the vastness of the problem. And Sandeep Pai's, of course, coal dependence. It's a very detailed work that he has carried out. Look at these. These people are, TERI, iForest. Also, there are other agencies like Center for Policy Research that have been discussing coal transition, but they are very Delhi based. So it's all beginning at the center, but nothing has reached at the grassroots level. At the moment,
let me briefly interrupt, Kuntala. You asked me for a 5-minute marker, and you're just over half an hour into your presentation.
Okay, good. This is my last slide.
Oh, there you go.
So that's why I was running my Black Diamond Express. Okay. And so, in this slide, you're seeing that India has a very poor record of historical mine closure. There is a history of dispossession. The idea of human rights has always been diluted. India doesn't have any indigenous people. What we have is scheduled castes and scheduled tribes. A very interesting colonial mindset there. India has also followed an elite development coal economy, and the trade unions, very interestingly, they have been largely blind to informal sector. But India is also going ahead with community-owned RE systems. If you Google Selco is a graduate of set up by a graduate of MIT, engineering graduate from MIT, who went to Bangalore and set up this firm. But so far, all these projects have been consistent with social justice, participation, equitable distribution of benefits, and recognition of marginal communities. So they deal with a whole host of issues. They don't just focus on RE, unlike the Cambodia example. So we know that the nature of the beast in global South countries is very different, and the strategies that work in EU or North America will not work in global South countries. But transition to fossil fuel free futures is imperative in global South countries like India particularly. So for this, we need to carefully consider what we mean when we talk about just transition. And so in this presentation, I have argued that justice would mean valuing human lives, particularly those that are mired in poverty, and that can be done through the recognition of the diversity of coal economies in India. Thank you very much for your patience, and thanks for listening.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Kuntala. That's great. And look, so we have just under up to 20 minutes for a conversation. I already see Beck's hand on and off again, and Kat as well, but I'll come to you for sure, right? And yeah, so we can use the chat, of course. Nick, thanks for your comment there. But yeah, you can also just take the floor, and we'll make this a conversation. And I know I will not get another word in, right, once we get going. So can I ask a question first? And Kuntala, that is, what do you distill out of all of this as a research agenda, right? So you've laid this out very clearly, massive challenges, some of the Indian sort of think tanks and quasi-research organizations kind of interested in a topic, doing bits and pieces. But, what can we do from a university standpoint in terms of actual research that brings insights that help? And, this is not just India specific. This is also something a lot of people are asking themselves with regard to that coal transition in Australia, for example, right? So very interested to hear your thoughts.
Well, thank you for that question, Frank. I think what we need to do, and that's the research at the moment I'm carrying out with my colleagues in coal mining areas, is what do people want? As as I said, that along the coal supply chain, there are different types of people whose lives are reliant on coal mining, and it's not just the think tanks who will say, whoa, we need to define this, we need to plan this. That's where they are at the moment. But we need to ask people on the ground what they actually mean by when they talk about, when we mention that, hey, coal is going to go away, its life is limited, and a transition is imminent, and so on. So that has not happened. If you, I see that Ruchira Talukdar is here, and she has written a PhD thesis about how within India, most of the debates have been driven by environmentalists who are based in Delhi and who have, sort of discussed about human rights, indigenous people's rights, human rights and displacement and so on. So debate has not yet gone towards climate change. Ordinary people may be feeling the brunt of climate change, but that discussion has not happened within India. So I would say that to create that debate, take that discussion out of Delhi into the grassroots would be the first step. And we academics can play a very important role in there, because most of us work in ways that requires the involvement of the community, and I think we can get a lot easier access into the communities than those metropolitan policymakers.
Do you see opportunities for yourself and your teams to do more empirical research on the ground in coming years?
Yes, certainly I do that. I have sought a grant, but I'm not sure whether that grant would come through or not. And without waiting for the grant, I have started some processes. Yeah.
Excellent. Beck, you have your hand up.
Thanks, Frank, and thank you very much, Kuntala, for the talk. I was wondering, would you be able to talk a little bit about your understanding of how people think about folks that work along the coal mining, transportation, energy generation? Like, is there a stigma of workers, or is there jealousy about workers in the sector? What's going on with the social relations there?
Beck, I'll tell you a story first, and then I'll answer you the bigger question, an individual story. So in late 80s, when I used to travel quite a lot in the area that were forest covered, undulating in eastern India, it is all coal mining now, coal mining area. But I used to travel quite a lot, and there was an indigenous community called Birhor. When the scheduling was happening, when they were being listed, this community somehow did not get scheduled. So they fell out of the crack, as it so happens often. And they were nomadic tribes. They never lived in one place. They would go from one, and their name Birhor means man of the forest, humans of the forest. And so I became quite interested in knowing them better, and so I would chase, walk with them and go meet them often. So befriended some of them quite well. And then in early 2000s, I was traveling in that area, and I see this informal mining, people pushing 250, 300 kilograms of coal in gunny bags, in sacks, on cycles, pushing up those undulating hills and so on. So after climbing a rather steep hill, a group of them had stopped and to to catch their breath. And I was passing by, so I stopped and to have a chat with them. And a man recognized me. He said, "Oh, Didi, I am Nirjal." His name, so Didi means elder sister. So that's the way we call each other in India to show respect. And sister, my name is Nirjal. You met me. And he was that Birhor man. So they were basically hunters and gatherers, collectors from the forest, the forest dependent people. And now, then I went back to they are all settled down in villages. And now these people, when they go out in the morning, they say, we are going to collect coal. They have turned from, forest collectors to coal collectors. So coming back to the bigger point is a model has been set in post-colonial India by giving the iconic status to coal. We have created a situation. India is the only country in the world that has a ministry of coal, besides UK at the peak of industrial revolution. And so this status will not be very easy for, and what is happening in India is also, resonates with other countries. Indonesia, I've done a bit of research, informal digging of coal. Only difference is a bit better instruments and, are used, I think, because of sparsity of population. So it is the case in Vietnam. In South Africa, there is a province called Mapalanga. And in Mapalanga province, our colleague Jessie Barton has written about it, and there's a lot of NGOs that are working. And I recently did a report on another topic on gender in just transition. And for that, I did a wide stakeholder survey or interviews with South Africa-based experts, academics, NGOs. And they were saying that unemployment rates are so high in those areas. The young people, they go out in the morning, like in India, they call it going out for coal collection, they call it zama zama. Zama zama means hustling. So they'll dig up some coal, sell it in the local wherever, and make a day's wage, make a day's earning. And that's how it is done in many of these countries, as Frank rightly pointed out. So how we will deal with just transition in these countries, I am worried that these countries will get pushed into poverty. A very large segment of the population might get pushed into poverty, and we need to think through that.
All good for you, Beck? Right, okay. On the chat, we have Yi Chang with a question there, and I'm fairly sure I'm mispronouncing your name, so I'm sorry about that. Would you like to make your comment in the round here? If not, the question is, Kuntala, could you say a little more about how energy transition might affect those laborers that are actually delivering coal, right? And so I guess you said there's a lot of people who are in the business of the actual coal delivery. And perhaps if I can elaborate a bit on that, this comes to the question of alternative employment very much. I mean, one thing we're very familiar with in Australia is the idea that coal miners might become solar panel installers, right? That's a sort of a intuitive idea, and in principle, it's nothing that speaks against that. In practice, the average wage of a solar panel installer is about 1/3 or 1/4 of the average wage of a coal miner in Australia. Perhaps in India, that's different.
Yeah, you're talking about, and not only with RE, there will be a host of technologies also coming into existence, and the way we use and distribute energy, produce and distribute energy might fundamentally change. And look, Ichang, you're talking about very poor people without much education or anything at all. You know, that India still has a very large number of people, I think 100 million people without access to electricity at the moment as we speak, around that figure. And these people who are delivering coal to different locations, they are doing it for a survival. If you see, I call it subsistence coal. They're just subsisting. They're making a living out of coal. And as this economy changes and a new economy comes into existence, honestly, I have no idea how badly it will affect them really, really badly. Their livelihoods will be undermined, but what the government has no plan, to be honest, in this regard. There is a high-level committee that has been set up by the government, and there is a lot of thinking that has been started by these NGOs and think tanks, and government's policy at the moment is still increase wind and solar capacity, and unlike other countries, in India, RE also includes hydropower. So India feels very comfortable when giving out the data on RE. But hydropower is also a very contested thing in India. They're not going to build many more dams, with bilateral relationships with Nepal being how bad it is now. India had been acting like a elder brother in that region, and Nepal has also now become quite affected, by that. So we really do not know where. I think coal, until 2030, India will be increasing its coal production, not decreasing.
Yeah, this is a longer term proposition. We just have a few minutes left. So if you'd like to make a comment, ask a question, let us know. In the meantime, Mosmi would like to ask a question, and then we'll come to you, Winmoy.
Yeah, hello, Kuntala. It is very relating to your presentation. My father worked in the Indian Railways in the Jharia mines, carrying that coal that passed through, and I can just see how interconnected these all issues are. Very correctly put that the lives of what is not captured in the formal reports of CIL and the other employment statistics is what really makes the coal economy in India. One question that then comes up is that what kind of transition do you think would be good for them? Especially, I'm talking about literally the ones whose lives are depending on physical collection of coal by hand, carrying them on gunny bags and just selling them for everyday living. What kind of help can state provide them? What kind of help can probably Indian Railways provide them, the army, which are part of existing and coexistence, especially in the eastern part, can offer them?
Yeah, good question, Mausumi. Whilst, as we were growing up and coal economy, this elite development coal economy was growing in India, we also saw that the health sector was privatized. Largely now, health sector has been privatized. The education sector has been privatized. The construction industry, this humongous construction industry in India, it's entirely in the private sector. So we have three critical, areas of to consider that could have been looked after by the state. We needed more roads. We needed more, as simple as that. in each village, we needed a school. In each, all the girls should have been sent to school, and roads should have been safe enough for the girls to attend school. If that happened, if the person who's sick could go to the hospital in a humane way, get treatment, not like dogs, not lying on the floor along with dogs and goats. If we could do that, these people would not collect coal. So what I say is that in India, even if think about transition, we need to divert our attention away from energy. We're doing energy transition, but divert our attention away from energy and think of that's what Sandeep Pai wrote in his book, Total Transition. Total Transition, in his book, he is saying that these are so poor, wretched of the earth, as Frantz Fanon said. These people are in it because there are no other alternatives. And how mafia controls them? What is not controlled by the mafia in India or elsewhere, really? Even the onions market in India are controlled by the mafia. So why not coal, which is much, better remunerative?
Yeah, I will just extend with one more thing. Do you think in India it is, first acknowledging that this is a problem that we have will be the first step? And this comes because, when I see the truck drivers in Australia, you have some kind of pride. But when we go back and see the same truck drivers in India, we do not carry that pride. Nobody wants to be truck driver by choice. Nobody wants to be coal miner by choice. So do you think the first step is to at least say in our conversations, in our reports and everywhere that this is a problem?
Yes, thank you very much. Exactly. So imagine Barbara Harris White's book, India Working, came out in 2003. And that in that book, she made a calculation that 83% of India's economy is in the informal sector. After that, India organized a commission on the unorganized sector. We call it unorganized sector, NC, National Commission on the Unorganized Sector. That came out with its report in 2005, but nothing. It had a series of recommendations. Nothing happened. We do not. India is running on the labor of informal labor, informal sector, and as you know, India's economy has come to a crashing halt today because of demonetization that really hurt the informal economy, the cash economy, where exchanges are based on the cash. So we need to acknowledge, and in all the forums that I have been invited to speak, CPR or iForest or CARTS, all these agencies, I have pointed out that you're talking about just transition. It's not just the Coal India Limited that you need to think about. Coal India Limited has 270,000 people on its payroll. That's what they show on their website. But they get 60% of their work done by local contractors. Local contractors hire 10 times that number of people who, removing the overburden, cutting the coal, putting them in the trucks, and then, and so on. So Coal India needs to also, this idea of outsourcing the work to informal sector is also, it's something that how the work is done, how mining is done, how the coal is transported. These are the nitty-gritties that will give you an idea about the size of the problem.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks for that. We're already a little bit past the end time, and some people have had to jump off, but I do want to give the opportunity for that final question or comment from Mrinmoy, please.
Madam, good morning from Bardhaman. My question is, how do you see India's non-conventional energy consumption in future, when we all know that it is very costly to make these plants, and these are very ultra modern technology oriented. How do you see? What are your subjective opinion regarding this point?
I have not studied the RE sector that well, but the technology is not really very difficult. It is very easy to adapt. Solar panels, India has actually become quite backward in the production of solar panels as compared to China. We jumped in ahead of India, started to produce. India could take up that lead, but it could not. It lost an opportunity. So RE technologies are not more difficult, actually not easier, a lot easier. I think India is also one of the largest wind producers, and it is going to be a very large solar producer. So India's overall energy need is very high, and much of that energy need is coming from the urban industrial area of India. It's not coming, it's not, so whenever there is huge demand and India is good, think about it, it's a distributive problem. Demand is coming from urban industrial area, and India is responding by increasing thermal power production, by importing coal. Indian companies are investing in other companies in overseas like Zambia and Mozambique and Indonesia. So many of these countries, coal mines are imported, owned by Indian agencies like the Tatas and also Coal India Limited and so on. So response has been by increasing coal, but at the same time, response has also been by increasing RE. So India can stand at the global forum. When in Glasgow, you will see they'll stand up with pride and head held high and say that we have done the right thing. We are enhancing. We are a poor country. Our per capita CO2 emission is very low. We need it. The problem is the poor. Again, Mosumi, absolutely spot on the question that you have asked, that again, the power that's being produced, either solar, wind or coal thermal, it's not going to that bottom. It's a very top-down model. And what I'm suggesting is that this is an opportunity. This is if we think about transformative potential of just transition, then we take this opportunity and create a new kind of democracy, energy democracy, following Timothy Mitchell's idea.
Okay, those are wise words and the very big picture. So thank you from all of us, Kuntala, great stuff, and thank you for offering this seminar. It's really good that we're keeping that going in this sort of online period, and we're all looking forward to hybrid seminars once again, probably from the beginning of next year, one would estimate. So everyone, stay well and hope to see you soon. Thanks very much again, Kuntala.
Thank you. Thank you for chairing the session.